Hi everyone, thanks again for joining me. Today, as promised, I'm going to be doing my painting tutorial, my very first painting tutorial. So as I said the other day, please be gentle. But I'm going to be doing it on the Bandai Mini Star Destroyer, which I absolutely love. I think it's a great little kit. I want to see its big brother. I really do want to see a big brother to this kit, especially from Bandai. I think they've been doing really well so far. So we're going to go through what I'm going to be doing with this kit. What colours I'm going to be using, techniques I'm going to be using, etc, 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 and what the overall result's going to be. Now, firstly, we're just going to quickly cover what you're going to need if you want to do what I'm doing. That's by no means necessarily the correct way to do it. You know, that's part of this hobby. It's an art. It's fun. Enjoy yourself. So this is just how I'm going to try it, and we'll just see if it works. So, what do I need? Well, firstly, my airbrush. I've got a little Delta airbrush here, which I picked up from a local store. It's a dual action airbrush, so I've got both control of the air and the paint flow, and I love it to bits. It is a great brush. It wasn't overly expensive, and I have been using this since I started airbrushing years ago. Can't get enough of it. Only thing I would say about it is a bit of a pain to clean, to get everything back in position correctly. Other than that, love it. So if you see one of these and you think, oh, well, it's cheap compared to the others, yeah, give it a shot. They're actually not bad. They're pretty good. I've done all my airbrushing with it so far. I haven't gone up to one of the bigger brands just because of the cost, and I'm quite happy with that one, so I haven't needed to. So, what are we going to be doing? What are we going to be doing? Well, first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to go over some of the darker areas on the Star Destroyer, and we're going to use a dark grey paint to do that. So we're going to use a Tamiya paint to do that, and we're just going to go into all these little recessed areas along the back and along the sides here, maybe a little bit in the hanger bays on the bottom, and on the superstructure. So I'm just going to darken them up with a darker grey, and just to help try and create a bit of depth on the later build. Some of you may have noticed that the engines are not in position yet, so I've left those off just because it's a fairly small model and that's a fairly deep area, and I want to make sure I get the paint in there nicely around the engines. So the engines themselves, I've actually just stuck them on a little bit of toothpick with a little bit of blue tack, and I'll paint on the outside of those too with the dark grey. And we'll gradually work our way to lighter colours, and the hope, or what I hope is I'm going to build up a bit of depth in those areas and along the top here. So hopefully it'll look quite nice. So what paints am I using? Well, this one here, XF19 Sky Grey by Tamiya. So this will be the first one that we use. It tends to look a bit darker than what it does in the bottle, so I'm hoping it doesn't go too dark, but we can work with it if it does. The other greys I'm using are Mr. Hobbies. I have tried Mr. Hobby paint before, but not these particular ones. So we're just going to try going in lighter shades of grey and working to white or an off-white back in Tamiya again, just to see how they go, just a bit of fun. I've got a Tamiya Clear, and I've got a Tamiya Smoke X19, which we may or may not use. We'll just see how the build goes and what it looks like before we get to that stage. Clear coats. So as you can see, I've got a clear coat here, the X22, the Tamiya Clear, which can run through the airbrush, or I've got the tins. Now basically just got this here so you can see your different options, what you can use. This doesn't work too bad through the airbrush. I quite like it. I find I'll get a much better coverage with the Kanzo, a much more consistent coverage. I don't know, must just be user error, operator error, but I just find I get a better coverage with that. You do have to be careful because it does pump it out quite quickly. So do not stand still with the can. Always keep it moving across the subject. All right, don't sit there and point at it because you'll just flood it with paint and wreck it. Now I won't be demonstrating these because I do these outside. I don't like to do them inside, but I thought I'd put them here so you can have a look at what you can use. So I've got Tamiya, I've got Testors, and I've got Mr. Hobby. Now I've used all of these with Mr. Hobby and Tamiya paints. I've never had an issue. I haven't used them with Tested paints, as in the colour paints, but I have used all these clears on Tamiya and Mr. Hobby, not a problem. So if you can't get a specific one, if you can't get this one, you can't get that one, don't worry. I haven't had any issues. So not to say that you won't, but I never have. So there's always an exception to the rule, isn't there? But they've all been pretty good for me. Next, Tamiya acrylic paint thinner. All right, I find I get a much better flow out of the airbrush when I use the paint thinner as opposed to water. I know some people use the water. That's fine. Whatever floats your boat. I prefer to use this. I also prefer to use it for tidying up and cleaning the airbrush itself. Not a bad little thinner. Pretty cheap, and they last you a long time if you use them sparingly. I use all my paints and my thinners and everything like that. I'll decant them into a little bottle top lid, and then use a straw to get either the paint or the thinner out into the bottle top lid. So I'll cut them down and use a small one for the paints, and they're pretty much just disposable. If you're not going to use the same paint again, just turf it, get rid of it. And that one just sits in my thinner and uses it to decant that. Pretty simple. It's much easier than trying to pour it, and pouring too much or pouring too little. You can control the amount a lot more easily. Last but not least, alright, so we have our masking tapes. So, I normally use Tamiya mask, and there's nothing wrong with Tamiya mask. I love Tamiya mask. But, for this Star Destroyer, I've decided I'll try something a bit different. We'll try some smaller ones here. So you can see these are quite thin. I mean, look at the thickness of that. That's tiny in comparison to my hand, or my finger. Right, so the biggest one I've got is 3mm. Now, forgive me for those of you in America, Liberia and Burma, I don't know what that converts to inches, but definitely, 3mm not that wide. I've got 2mm and a 1mm as well, so very, very narrow. Now, why have I got these? Right, well, one thing with this kit, because it is such a small size, it doesn't have... And we'll zoom in so you can have a little bit better at what I'm talking about. Come on. Oh, man. Epic camera fails tonight. There we go. Alright. So, it doesn't have very many panel lines. So, there's one or two little areas where they've put little panel lines in, but understandably, because of the scale, to do the panel lines on the surfacing is just not possible. It really wouldn't look very good at all. So how do we overcome that? Well, there's already a person, I believe, who's launched a decal set for aftermarket use. Now, basically, I haven't had a good look at it, but I'm pretty certain it's you paint the model, give it your clear coat, whatever, make sure it's nice and smooth, and then put your decals down and seal them in. I'd assume that's how it works. What we're going to do is something a little bit more time consuming, I suppose, but also should give us a slightly different effect. One thing about the models in the Star Wars universe is they're always nicely worn. There's one thing that Industrial Light and Magic and LucasArts and everything did well. They've got these models that just look like they've been around the block, look like they've been in battle, they look like they've had a hard life. And that's what we're going to replicate with this, hopefully. So what I intend to do is we're going to use one of the darker greys, and we'll probably go through a few different shades. We're going to lay that down as a base coat over the top of this darker grey here, or try and avoid covering it, but additional to it. We're then going to let it dry, and we're going to mask off little bits and pieces, little squares, going from front to back, essentially, or back to front, whichever way. But we want to keep them going and looking like they're in line, going from nose to tail. Alright, because otherwise they look a bit funny. So we'll try and keep them, they can be square, they can be oblong, they can be any sort of, four-cornered shape. But so long as they're sort of lining up with the front, and you notice they've done that with their little bits that are raised. If you have a good look at these kits, all their little pieces that are raised, excuse me, alright, so you see them along the nose there, they've done the same thing. Alright, so you've got little squares and little oblongs, which are all pretty much lined up off the spine, I suppose you'd call the spine of the model. Sorry, everyone, the spine of the model there. So they'll run in line to that. Oh, there's the airbrush. Sorry, I'll just switch that off for a sec. So they'll run in line to that, and it just, I don't know, it just makes it look a lot more realistic, I suppose, is the way you'd say it. Looks more uniform. But we're going to do the same with our painting, and when we give it a darker colour, then we mask off a few of the areas and go a lighter shade, then we'll mask off a few areas and another lighter shade, and just keep repeating that process. And by the time we pull it back and we remove all the mask, by the time we've finished our white or our off-white and remove all the mask, we should have a lot of lovely little squares and oblongs and things along the surface, just to break up the surface a bit more, make it a little bit more interesting. So hopefully it'll work. I have done this technique with other models, but obviously they've been a lot bigger. So I haven't tried it with something this size, but we'll just see how it goes, and we'll have a bit of a feel for it. And if you like it, you can certainly try it and go, oh, well, you know, I'll do that, but I'll tweak this or change this or do it this way or whatever, you know, just have a bit of fun. That's what it's all about. So we're going to try that on the top or the bottom. But firstly, I am going to disappear. I'm going to paint the darker trenches and everything like that. Paint the trenches and everything like that in darker greys. You don't need to see me do that. It's pretty boring stuff. And get it all set, and then I'll probably put our top coat on, and then I'll come back at the part where I've started to put on some tape. Alright, we'll go from there. Excellent. Well, thanks for tuning in. This will be the first part, and the second part will be along shortly. Thank you very much.